just added a photo to my album of me in Hong Kong, and this is me at my weighing a lot less than I do now.
More pictures of baby James in his early.
Well, it's less baby, just James before he ate too much McDonald's. This is why I like McDonald's. Yeah.
That sounded really mean, by the way. I didn't try to be mean like that.
Did you just make fun of him about McDonald's?
No, I just said, oh man, and the oh man sounds so mean if someone says like, oh, this is a picture of when I was thinner, and now you're like, oh.
No, that's me too thin. Like, I bumped into someone in Singapore who was one of my classmates, and he didn't recognize me. I'd lost so much weight.
It's always a good thing.
Oh no, that was unhealthy.
I know. Oh yeah, that was it was I'm on a ship and I did a lot of work.
Yeah, the container ship diet.
Oh man, practically did the same.
Wow.
Only weird thing is that people still recognize me without a doubt, even though I lost like a ton of weight. Scott, I still didn't show you the pictures.
Yeah, I mean, these are crazy. If we show some pictures of James, maybe we gotta throw some pictures of you and me in our whatever days as well. James, that one's crazy. You're real thin.
I'm very thin.
But I like the one with the sword. Maybe people will get to see it. Speaking of people, James, we're back, and we have been for a while. Sneaky start. Ha ha. Got him.
Does this mean I have to speak slowly and deeper because it's a podcast and everyone listens on two times speed?
Flip into your radio voice now.
Have you been listening to my voice?
Yeah, it doesn't matter if you pause because everyone has the silence snipped out, doesn't it? So it's fine.
Well, whenever I do the intros, which I'm about to do, I always go into my
always throw off my glasses.
Radio voice. James or Joey, keep those on. Anyway, welcome back, everyone. This is part 2 of Between Two Worlds. We're back with James, and he's been showing us pictures of himself.
Yes, I have. Me, when I was working on a container ship, I lost 10 kilos of weight in 6 weeks because I was doing physical labor because working on a ship, and we had no air conditioning, so I just sweated 24 hours a day for 6 weeks at the equator.
It looks like no air conditioning as well as no food because it doesn't look like
actually I didn't eat as well because it was a Chinese ship and proper Chinese food is not something I'm a fan of.
Oh, really? That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're back, and let's talk a little bit about some things that came up in the last episode. During the break, Joey and I have kind of realized we've got this dynamic. It becomes 2-on-1 depending on who we have on this podcast. If we got somebody who, believes in something, especially if they're a Christian, then Joey's kind of the odd man out, and inevitably kind of can become the point of some questions, which he's totally cool with. And if we have a non-believer on, somebody who's not Christian, they're kind of like, Scott, why do you believe what you believe? And let's talk. So that may or may not happen, but we're cool with it. We're cool with it here. We're cool with the hot seat.
Definitely. And I can see in James's eyes, he's just thinking of the thing that he and Scott are disagreeing on. I can feel it.
We did ask that too. You're watching the video. James is brooding. He's currently brooding.
I'm always brooding. That's why you can't take decent photographs of me.
Whew. Side note on that. Wow, it is hard to take some decent photographs of James. We had this event where we helped our friend who's from Nigeria, and he's becoming like a coach, like a physical trainer for kids, PE teacher kind of thing. And we're all really excited. We're celebrating Lucky, and he's finished. And then right there in the corner, what? Unhappy British man, or is that his smile? No one really knows. It was James.
We're really the same. After getting my glasses, I tend to smile a little bit more, but because my eyes are always a little bit closed, it looks like I'm always kind of angry. At least that's what people tell me. So whenever people are taking a regular picture, it's like, oh man, this guy in the background, he looks like he's gonna kill someone.
That's awesome. Although I guess for me, one time when I was playing Romeo and Juliet, I wasn't playing both of them. I was just Romeo. I had a.
Just imagine, like, Romeo, just half Romeo, half Juliet, just switching
running up
around
and down
sides.
some stairs, up and down a balcony.
Oh boy, wow! I want to be in that play. But anyway, I had this fight scene, and I guess when I'm about to fight, we're doing some sword fighting. Felt really cool. But I'm supposed to be angry. This is when Romeo's like going berserk because he thinks Juliet's dead, and so he's like, this dude named Paris is kind of in between him and the tomb where Juliet is, and he's just like, get out of the way, man. I'm not messing around. And then they fight, and he kills Paris. And I'm supposed to be serious, but I was smiling the whole time because I don't know, my fight face is a smile. And so they're like, Romeo's not creepy. He's not a psychopath. He's actually just really upset. Scott, could you lose the smile for a little bit? It's like, it's hard. It's just plastered on my face. Anyway, enough of that.
I just still see you just half-faced Romeo and half-faced Juliet.
All right. James?
Yes.
What questions would we like to ask Joey?
Okay, so if we're bullying Joey now, I guess the question I'd ask Joey. So I'm always interested in like how much, because this is something I've looked into and have deep set opinions on. But like, what's your impression of like Jesus, and did he actually exist? And is there evidence for him? Like, as someone who hasn't looked into it and it's just in the normal culture, what's your impression of that?
So the thing I always notice is that, except for the Chinese, we're all using the same year system. So we're all agreeing it's 2020 and it's after Christ's birth. We started counting the years. So that's something that has always been like, hey, there's something going on there. Do I believe he's the son of God? I can't tell. We might never know. Maybe we know after we die. But I know that there was an historical figure, and after that, people started counting the years with the Christian calendar, because it's 2020 after the birth of Christ. So was there a guy called Jesus as an historical figure? Probably yes.
Okay.
For the rest, yeah, for like what kind of beliefs do I have with how much do I believe all those things exist? That's where my agnostic side comes in. Like, I am still a believer of something. So God is a possibility to me, but I will never name it as God.
Okay.
But the Bible and the stories really, all religion is interesting because there's a lot of, for the people who don't know, I'm kind of a nerd. I love gaming, I love books, I love fantasy. And technically all religious stories tie in there somewhere. There's a lot of fantasy stuff going on, in my eyes at least, fantasy, which is fascinating. I remember a story that Scott told me. I don't know his name anymore because I'm terrible with names. There was this guy who worked for an emperor, and they threw him in a lion pit, and because of his belief, the lions didn't eat him. And then
Daniel.
Book of Daniel, that was it.
Yes.
And yeah, so those kind of stories are fascinating to me. And there's always the possibility that those are because of faith. You never know. Like, there's a million reasons that you can fill in, like, oh, the lions didn't eat him because of this. But there's also that one possibility that God protected him that day.
And then I guess my follow-up to that is, so like the Bible itself as like a historical source, what would your opinion of that? Do you think it's totally made up, or do you think there's like, obviously it's 66 different books, so you can't comment on every one, but like, what's your impression of the Bible and how accurate it may or may not be?
I think there's a lot of things that are mostly based on what we had before, maybe not even before, because morals are very difficult to put into words. So a lot of things that are guidelines of what is good and what is bad, I feel like, is that necessarily a thing that God created for us and put in a book? It's really difficult for me to pinpoint if that's accurate or not, because it's been rewritten so many times, which is also a good thing, because there's also so many bad things through history within Christianity or within the church that are written out, which again is a good thing, and also added on that are also positive. Of course, I haven't read the Bible, so I cannot really pinpoint good examples for that. But I've listened to so many stories this past year. Thanks to Scott. Thank you, Scott. That I can make that assessment on it.
What do you mean by your impression that it's been rewritten? What do you mean by that?
Oh, I can imagine that the first Bible, that it was totally different from the current one. There was so many different cultures going on, so many different things that were considered good that maybe now are considered bad, like typical ways of punishment or ways of how people were told to behave compared to now. Like, again, I'm not really having any good examples, but that's what I've heard from closer family, because my grandparents were apparently Christians. Didn't know that before. But they told us or told me that there were stories that they changed along the way. Again, not with examples, but that made them change beliefs.
Okay. So this is one of the things that kind of I was questioning as a teenager, like, how accurate is the Bible I'm reading today? And I think and it's confusing because there are lots of different translations, and I guess I don't know how much you experienced that when you came to the NAVs. Like, people read the Bible and there's slightly different wordings, and actually, I would say I'm fairly confident that the Bible most people reading today is the same Bible that was written in the century after Jesus. Like Christianity over the last 1,000 years has been very good at questioning, where are we getting this translation from? What's our original source? And being like, okay, there's a new source, we'll question it. And actually, there's notes in my Bible. We've been reading John chapter 7, I think it is, where it literally says, we think this is original, but we're not sure. So, and it's like 11 verses, but they highlight it. So I think most of the Bible is pretty accurate to what the original text was. So yeah, I guess that would be that's my impression of it. And it's always interesting to hear other people's from my end.
One quick thought on that as well, Joey, because I think you're right. If the Bible was edited throughout history, it would certainly discredit it. A good example of this, and I only know this through the play, The Book of Mormon. I actually haven't read the Book of Mormon myself, but there's like this joke that in the Book of Mormon, they used to talk about how black people were of the devil, which you don't want that in your sacred text, because that alienates half the world, or not half, but just a ton of people. We actually had a neighbor who was looking into Mormonism back in the States. She found that and she's just like, oh, I can't believe this, because she was, she'd emigrated from Africa. And so in about 1970s, the Mormon church kind of got wise, and they're like, we need to change this. We can't have this belief. And so they just edited it. They just said, God gave us a new revelation. Now God is cool with black people. So welcome to the Mormon church. And so if Christianity is doing that, yeah, we should have no part of it, because that's silly. That humans are just saying like, oh gosh, we've got some bad beliefs, let's just like change it up. So that's one of the things that I actually really find intriguing about the Bible, is that it doesn't self-censor. You start reading from the beginning, Genesis, and right off the bat, you're like, these are some horrible stories. These are some horrible things that humans are doing. Brianna's reading right now, and she's kind of going from the beginning and going through. And so I'm getting all of her commentary. She's like, Scott, why is this in here? This is horrible. Namely, there's a lot of polygamy, and there's a lot of horrible things that happen within the marriages. Abraham's a great example right off the bat. He pretends like his wife is his sister so that people don't kill him because of how beautiful she is. to the point that the Egyptian king tries to sleep with her until he realizes that she's actually that guy's husband. And he's like, what? Why is he tricking us? I don't want to sleep with another man's wife. Why are you doing that, Abraham? And Abraham's like, well, it's because I was scared. And it's all these like, and that's just one moment. And then you go through Genesis and like over and over again. Then you get into Judges, and Judges is by far one of the hardest books I've ever read, most horrendous stories I've ever read. It's just like horrible. But I think the thing there is the Bible is not trying to present perfect examples of what it means to follow God so that we just know what to do, but more it is depicting real people in real time trying to work out faith in God and what that means, and they make mistakes. There's a lot of mistakes in the Bible, a lot of human error. And so you can look at those stories and say, gosh, why did they leave this in here? That does not give much credibility to these great people in the biblical faith. Abraham or Moses, David, all like dudes that made some huge mistakes. Yet the Bible keeps them in so that me, in the 21st century, little dude, who is well acquainted with how much I make mistakes as a human, I can see how relatable they are and how they stayed with their faith, even though they made all these mistakes. So all that to say, there's overwhelming examples of how the Bible leaves in its weird stories, violent stories, horrific sexual stories. Like there's rape in there, there's incest in there. And not that God condones those things, but it's the reality of humans trying to work out their faith in the world. Does that kind of make sense?
That makes sense.
So it's fascinating to me. The Bible doesn't self-edit, and it's why I really like it.
And people haven't edited the Bible.
All right. Again, I've learned something new today.
And you, Joey, or if anyone's listening, totally take us to task on this. My hope for this podcast is that we have a little community that, in like a respectful way, no one's name calling, but just we can start to have like a community that fact checks us. So
Yeah, this is the internet.
yeah, like go to town.
Which is awesome, because I just gave an answer as someone that hasn't read it, doesn't have a big background on it, and just answered the question that James asked me as someone that what I actually think.
Yeah.
Without any pre-knowledge. So this might be how multiple people look at it. Maybe I'm unique. Maybe I just think about it that way.
I think you're not alone. I think you're totally right. I think that's the prevailing narrative, is that how could a series of books put together into one Bible stay the same all that time? It's a great question, and one that actually does have a good answer to it.
Have you ever heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls?
Yeah, by name, yes, sounds familiar.
So I've been watching videos about this over the last few days because it's something that I'm aware of but wasn't really sure about. And essentially, there was a couple of kids down by the Dead Sea in Israel who were playing in some caves, and all of a sudden, and they found these texts. And they turned out to come from like 200 years BC. And it's essentially the entirety of there's about 14 caves there that they found these texts in, and some of it is like the community that was living there and telling them the rules, like wear your clothes and don't be naked, or or kind of like the calendar month, or there's a really weird thing about where they hid their treasure. But also there's an entire Old Testament, apart from the Book of Esther, there, and essentially it's the same as the one that we're reading today, and like the changes are kind of people might have put a comma in somewhere else, and actually it's helped us understand some words we didn't understand in some of the later translations that we were using. So yeah, kind of these things keep on. It's kind of always evolving, and kind of things that do change tend to have been confirming things as opposed to things that disprove the validity of the text. Yeah.
Okay, it's actually really cool. Just finding that.
Yeah. Dead Sea Scrolls kind of changed the game for Christianity, because prior to that, we only had copies of books. The earliest copies were after Jesus's
Yes,
life,
about 900 AD was the oldest Old Testament we had.
which is
And
really long time after Jesus.
yeah,
900 years.
and that, so yeah, it kind of confirmed that this guy called Jesus was reading the same Old Testament that we were, which is, I guess, important because it means that he's at least evaluating the same text as we are, which is, yeah, it means we can understand where he's coming from a little bit better.
Yeah, because one of the theories against Christianity is that the disciples made it all up, that Jesus was a teacher, and he said predominantly most of the things he actually said, or is recorded about him. Miracles, maybe made up, maybe not true. But then the disciples, over the course of hundreds of years, theology was built. The Old Testament was written to kind of like all loop in on top of itself, which is impressive in and of itself if that's how it happened. But then the Dead Sea Scrolls showed, no, this didn't all come into existence around 900 years, that 200 BC, so 200 years before Jesus, there was a copy of these things being written, and it was very similar to what we have in 900.
Yeah, because that is something I've been thinking just now, is that of course it's 2020 and we started counting after the birth of Jesus, but the belief of God itself should be older, technically speaking.
Then 2,000 years.
Yeah, there's
there were Jews before Jesus.
Yeah.
Type thing.
Yeah, so there should be also scriptures, other texts before that. So it's kind of fascinating that, as an example, that Jesus as the Messiah, just that became a focus, so to speak, and that there's, at least in modern day knowledge, as someone that's not religious, that there's no other people that stand out in the same type of way. At least, again, not that I know of.
Oh, as like a Messiah figure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's something that made me curious. Is do you guys perhaps know of something similar, or of someone similar?
Well, so like the idea of so around the time of Jesus, there were plenty of messianic groups and like people who claimed to be the Messiah, but obviously Jesus is the one that ended up surviving, so to speak, and I believe that's because he was the Messiah. But kind of this idea of a Messiah was one that came up because the Jews were like, they saw they were oppressed. They were under Roman oppression at the time of Jesus, and they saw like they were looking for someone to save them. So there were people coming and saying they would save them, but obviously didn't. And that's the other thing about Jesus. Kind of, he was countercultural to the people at the time. Like, they were expecting a warrior king, and he came and died on a cross, which is totally opposite to kind of what people expected from him at the time.
Also, Joey, I don't know if this is what you're asking, but there is in other cultures as well narratives of about a Messiah or the Son of God coming down. Egyptian myth lore, Ra, I think, you might actually probably know this better than I do, but was the Son of God, I think, or
close. He's the sun god. The god of the sun.
Knew it. I knew I was close.
You were close.
Well, one of them, right? Who is it?
The people like that. So there are kind of some stories which have some parallels in other cultures.
I mean,
so
like this is Greek culture, I believe. Stories of Hercules, stories of Achilles. They had a ton of like demigods just walking around. And not necessarily messiahs, but warriors that were half god, half human. So
Zeus definitely was working overtime to get a lot of little half gods out there.
Oh, trust me, you don't know half of those stories.
Yeah, but I guess Hercules is an interesting one, isn't he? Because so he's the one people know today because he's got a nice little cartoon made in the 90s about him.
Great movie.
But like, I like no, there's no real there's obviously stories about gods and gods who had children, like in ancient culture, but quite often these gods were like acted like people. Like the Greek gods and goddesses are incredibly mardy. Like they just like they're terrible people.
Yeah.
Like like Zeus, a little bit rapey. Like it kind of there's all sorts of, like and that's and like whereas this Judeo-Christian God, like he's the one God, and he has three parts, and there's the Trinity, which I really struggle as a concept to understand and explain sometime. But there is one God, and he came down to earth, and he was holy God and holy man, and there was no kind of you're a demigod or you're a half god. And then like there's no real equivalent. Like again, going back to Hercules, he dies and he gets put up in the stars, doesn't he? Whereas Jesus, he dies and comes back to life again. And there's no real equivalent to that in the ancient world. Those people try to, there are parallels somewhere, but there's no real copycat story, certainly from before Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
I see.
Yeah, and I think those, because this is something I've heard before, those stories that predate Jesus that talk about a Messiah or God coming down, I think it speaks to a universal human desire for God to come and make contact with the human world, for there to be a bridge between the divine and the earthly. And so I think you will see glimpses of that theme throughout cultures, throughout religions, throughout time, because that's an inherent human longing to look into the cosmos, to look up at the stars, to look around at the world and say, is there more than what meets the eye? And to start to dream about, is there a God, and who is that God? And can I know what that God is and what that God wants from me? So that's like the basis for all religion. Then you start to figure out, well, how do you answer those questions? Yeah.
All right. That totally answered my question.
Nailed it. We could shift gears, James, unless you had other thoughts that you wanted to jump into.
I didn't. I think that's my, just find it. Yeah, it's kind of was interested to hear what Joey thought and then kind of put my opinion on it.
Yeah, for real, Joey. I really appreciate, again, I just appreciate you. You're an honest person. And it's really cool to hear. Yeah, you're like, well, this is what I think. And I feel like you're a representative of what a lot of people probably think, what they might know about it. And I think you've even mentioned this, Joey. That's the importance of looking into things. You had talked about within Black Lives Matter. You said it's important to know the history of something, to know why they believe what they believe now, to know why it got to where it got to.
Yeah, definitely. Because a big thing in America, and especially American culture, a lot of the time, especially in shows, they bring up 200 years of slavery. That is the most important thing that they're battling against right now, to this day. And I figured, like, yeah, but slavery was before that, so why is this so important? And I read this very specific book that showed how horrific those last 200 years actually were. So knowing why it's so important and why people tackle that now is learning of the history that comes with it. And I feel the same with religion, and getting an opinion out about that is like first understanding, not all of it because it's way too much, but a lot of it, so that you can have a good base opinion about it before speaking out or speaking with.
Yeah, it's good to be informed. It's good to look into things.
I especially with things like religion and books of the Bible, that's there as well. Like if you're reading the Bible, quite often knowing the context for the book is important, because that'll make a difference to how you read it. Because the Bible is written really, there's a lot of different styles in there. There's poetry, there's biography, there's a bit of history, and then there's some of it which is I forget the name now, but it's very like Revelations and some of Genesis, which is not necessarily literal, or it's a bit more dreamlike, and like knowing the context of how this has been written, or even when it's been written, like especially some of the Old Testament books. We're going through in another Bible group a book called Habakkuk, where like it's Old Testament and it's obscure, and knowing the history really helps to kind of understand what's being written in the text. And that's something that's very important, I think, when you're exploring these things and can be forgotten.
Also, since we're on the Bible, I'll do this last bit. I was just thinking about, I also looked into some of the uniqueness of the Bible. And Joey, I don't know if you can tell me if you know any of these statistics, but James already mentioned it's 67 books. So it's not just one book. 67 different books.
66.
Dang
66.
Edit this out. Okay, 66 books.
Keep it in for sure.
Dang it. Okay, 66 books. Wow, I feel like I counted that wrong. Okay. I threw in one of the Apocrypha. I threw Tobias in there. So 66, I guess it depends on if you're Catholic or if you're Protestant. But it's written in 3 different languages. So you've got Koine Greek, which is like common Greek. That is New Testament. And the reason it's written in that, because this is like Roman Empire. So you're like, why is it not written in Latin? What the heck? But it's because of Alexander the Great and his empire that previously had conquered all of those regions all the way down to Egypt. That was the common language that everyone spoke, Koine Greek. So they wanted the Bible to be in that common language that everyone used. It's written in Hebrew, Old Testament, and then it's written in Aramaic, which is coming out of the Persian Empire. That was the language that was used there. So then it's written on 3 different continents. So you've got the start of Europe down there in Greece, and the different letters that Paul's writing. That's like post-Jesus. Aramaic is a lot of like some of the histories, and that is in the Persian. That's like modern day Iran. That's like where that was taking place, at least the events. I don't know exactly where it was written. And then you've got Middle East. And so that's, obviously where Israel is and stuff. And it's written over a time period of, and this is the one I don't quite know, although obviously I didn't know the books either, but 1,200 years, I'm pretty sure, which is basically like from today all the way back down to 1200 AD, which, what was even happening in 1200 AD? People were fighting with swords still.
Amsterdam didn't exist.
Really? Oh, crazy.
Yes.
No, definitely no.
Oh, man. So you think about books that were written, 66 books in that time span. So you've got Shakespeare, you've got Queen Elizabeth in England, you've got Amsterdam coming on the scene, you've got the Spanish Empire, and everyone's like, we don't like you. And then you got like the Mongols coming in. And so all of these events, Industrial Revolution, a book may be written every so often, and for them to have the exact same storyline and to loop together and to intermingle their paths throughout history until you have this one book, that's what makes the Bible so compelling. You're like, what? How is this all connected? How is this story so, consistent throughout? So that's my little, let me throw that in for the Bible.
Is Scott also trying to tell me, like, hey, give it a read, give it a go?
Give it a go, Joey. Give it a go.
And maybe practically for the listeners, if you do need if you are whether you're reading the Bible for the first time as someone who's curious, or you've read it 100 times and are a Christian, like if you want the context, a great resource for that is a YouTube channel called The Bible Project, and they have a little video that summarizes each book or maybe half of the book of the Bible, and it gives the context and the themes and kind of the style of the book. And that's just a great little resource as like a introduction to the different parts of the Bible, because as Scott says, they're all very different. And sometimes for us who aren't expert in these things, it's hard for us to see these things.
For sure. Okay, Joey, we'll take you off the hot seat.
I'm off the hot seat. Okay, I'm gonna sit differently. So
Hey guys, thanks for watching. Let us know what you thought of this video. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or turn on notifications, or check out our Patreon page, or our social media, or do all of them. We're a podcast, so wherever you get your podcasts, give us a listen, whether you're doing the dishes or pooping or walking the dog. We'd love to be there with you. Finally, if you like this video, check out these videos.